Welcome to the 14 Wins podcast, where we talk about UFOs and all the related high strangeness. I go by Bones, and with us, as always, is RamX.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, Ram. Happy New Year. We got a new show, and I'm feeling good about it. So what we're going to talk about is UFOs and theocracy.
Yes, we're going to tie it all together.
And you read a book. You read a book over the holidays that really kind of tied things together, and I'm pretty excited about it. Sounds really fascinating. So do you want to just go into it?
Yeah, I'll just dive into it. Like, even how I came about the book and the author is relevant to all of it. So it was the new year, and the weather was bad, and I thought, it's time for me to read the book Final Events by Nick Redfern. And this is a book that we've mentioned it, even at least tangentially, like whenever we talk about the Collins elite. And the Collins elite, I would say I have been mistaken sometimes when I have described them, because I have described them as a group of congressmen or elected officials. And it seems to me now, after reading the book, that the elected officials are working more for the Collins elite rather than encompassing the Collins elite. We have mentioned them before as a group of people in the government that have fundamental beliefs, Christian fundamental beliefs. And they believe something along the lines of what we do in terms of science and intelligence around the phenomenon, in that it resembles something like demonic or a demonology of old. And some cases do, for sure, and they're all related, so they're looking at it like, well, these are demons. And Lou Elizondo has said several times that he was confronted in the hallways of, I think, Congress, where somebody pulled him into his office and said, Lou, you gotta watch it. What you're looking into here is demons. And this group has long been mentioned to be blocking certain things around UFO disclosure and wants to control UFO disclosure and make it into something they want. But that's all part of the story we're going to talk about today, and it ties all of our work together. So if you listen to the last episode where we talked about prophets and power, and if you've been listening to how we talk about who runs the world, we've been pretty focused on this theocratic group. And I think that gets really involved here today. And I knew about this book. This book is famous in UFO lore for talking about the Collins elite. It's really the only source on the subject. And we need to really give Nick Redfern a lot of credit. Nick is one of the most prolific and influential Forteans of all time. He barely didn't make it into our top 5, but now I would say that him and Mac Tonnies are tied for my top 5 Forteans of all time.
Okay.
And they were friends, so that's appropriate. But in very different ways. Like, Nick is a investigative researcher, and Tawny's, I think, was more of a intellectual explorer. So Nick makes it very clear in the book that his sources are a couple of whistleblowers. And he also makes it clear that he thinks that they're being pseudonymous with him, or they're not telling him their real names. But they are people that were involved with the Collins elite who are now coming forward and telling Redfern about it. There was another Fortean named Ray Bowish who gets involved. And Ray was a priest. He was a pastor. So they came to Ray first and then ended up with Nick. And Nick makes it very clear in the book that he is just reporting and repeating what they are saying. That you cannot hold Nick accountable for everything that they say or do. And you got to remember that Nick publishes this back in 2010. So that's pretty ballsy, because this is still extraterrestrial time, where anything like interdimensional hasn't even entered the mainstream ufology conversation. So he ends up taking a lot of heat for this. And there's a lot of, you can imagine the conflict that we talk about between the science wing of the UFO world and the fact that it involves consciousness and things like spirituality, and it does. And if you were a smart scientist, you'd take that as a clue and try to use that to figure something out. But a lot of people are not, unfortunately. They stop and say, no, it's scientific dogma and this is religion and you're trying to cross streams. Stupid. But anyway, Nick gets a lot of heat over the years for this, unfortunately, but fearlessly reported on the subject and makes it clear that he is just a reporter. And it pisses me off when people like George Knapp and Ross Coulthart take heat for just repeating what sources tell them and tell you, I am telling you what a source told me. So you can either get that information or not. I would like to know as much as I can about the source, but they're just being reporters. So either ignore it or take it into your true bag or put it into your false bag. It doesn't matter, but you need a reporter to tell you what happened. So, credit to Nick for doing that. And then the timing of my reading it ends up being important here too. We recorded that last episode, Prophets, and Power, before the holidays. And then I should point out, Bones dropped his fantastic musical journey into high strangeness.
It was a journey.
That was amazing, man. So, I just really want people to know that you compose all of that yourself. You play all of the instruments, and it's so kick-ass. I cannot believe it.
Hey, thanks, man.
A lot. And if you're on Spotify, Spotify rejected that episode because it had so much music on it. So you can hear it on iTunes or Buzzsprout or Amazon or anywhere. Please check out Bones' little musical holiday gift to us. But prior to that, we had recorded our Prophets, and Power episode, and we didn't want to drop it until after the holidays because it seemed like kind of a bummer.
Right.
And I point that out because I had not read this book when we recorded that last episode. And the fact that the book was published in 2010 and that the people in the book were telling Nick what they were then, and then we started our operational timeline in 2010, I think is a very interesting coinkydink.
Yeah.
So I end up reading this book over a couple of days, New Year's Eve day and then New Year's Day. So it's always going to be very memorable for me. It was bad weather, and I was glad to be stuck inside with something that I was just hooked on. But the book confirmed for me several other things. This Collins elite essentially starts their timeline a few years after Roswell. And they start their timeline with Parsons and Hubbard. And really, you could say with Crowley. And Crowley tries to do this Amalantra working ritual, and this is in 1918. And a lot of OTO rituals or Crowleyan rituals involve sex magic. It just does. And so did this Amalantra working, and the Babylon working ritual eventually would involve sex magic with Jack Parsons as well. But they differed very much in their intentions. So the Collins elite believed that the Amalantra working ritual was opening a door, cracking it a little bit. And it was a door to another dimension that you weren't supposed to. And through that, Crowley contacted a being named Lamb. He also downloaded the Book of the Law, which was very anti-Christian. And Crowley made it explicit that he was trying to destroy Christianity and usher in a new age. Crowley hooks up with this woman that he referred to as the Scarlet Woman. Both him and Jack Parsons were obsessed with this concept of a Scarlet Woman. And they engage in all these sex magic rituals. And Crowley gets the Book of the Law. And the intention of the ritual was for universal wisdom. So if you believe that the Book of the Law was dictated by another dimensional being and that the evidence around Crowley supports that he contacted some other entity from some other plane, then it worked. Bottom line, the ritual worked. I would say that there's enough evidence there. We've talked about the drawing of Lamb and how much it looks like a drawing of a gray alien.
Yeah, that's right.
And Crowley did that long before people were talking about aliens.
Yeah.
And then the Collins elite believed that Parsons came through and kicked open that door that Crowley had cracked. And that by doing so, he was allowing demons to come through and ushering in sort of a final events, end of days type apocalypse scenario. And that ritual was performed by Jack Parsons, who was the founder of JPL. It was even jokingly referred to as Jack Parsons Laboratory, but it was, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, which is well known out in California. It gets involved in a lot of UFO stuff. Jack Parsons is widely considered a big reason we have rockets in the U.S. And then eventually got to the moon. So by doing what he was doing and trying to get to the moon and calling on occult powers to help him, and then he was also engaged in this Babylon working ritual with L. Ron Hubbard, And ultimately, the goal of that was to manifest an individual incarnation of the Ptolemaic goddess Babylon, or the Scarlet Woman. You know, again, they're obsessed with this idea of the Scarlet Woman in Babylon. And they want to incorporate her into a human form, which Parsons would then have sex with and create a moonchild through pregnancy, right? And the moonchild gets pretty interesting, too. So I've heard these rituals referenced. We've even referenced them a lot, the Amalantra working and the Babylon working rituals, but we never got really into the goals of those different rituals, and I think that that's really relevant.
I'm sure some of our female listeners can relate. I mean, how many times have they been approached by a man calling them the Scarlet Woman and wanting a moonchild with them? Not this again.
So in occult terms, the moonchild is a magical child. It's a being that's conceived not through biological means, or not just through biological means. Biological means are required, to your point. But it does also require intense ritual to serve as a vessel for a spiritual force. And the idea here is that if you birthed a child during a high-stakes ritual, a being from another dimension would see it all and then use the child as their vessel, and now that being is incarnated in human form in the real world.
Right.
It's very much like them trying to bring in an antichrist. And they were. They definitely were. But you and I were just discussing how nebulous this definition of Satanism gets, because you really have to believe in Christianity in order to believe in Satan. And they didn't really believe in Christianity, so they just hated Christianity, and they were trying to bring in an antichrist. And the Collins elite sees all this, and they go, well, that's how the devil gets in. And they go, oh, this is the devil's final deception. And they're using all of these people. Now, where did they get that idea? Because these are top military, scientists, bureaucrats, financial elites. It included some politicians. So these are people of power and wealth and education. Where did they get these ideas? Because they actually had some basis for thinking this, right?
Right.
They start getting the idea really right after Roswell. You know, Roswell happens in 1947, and then that, I think, scared a lot of people. And we can look at cases like the Lonnie Zamora case, very famous case where a policeman encounters some aliens that were taking soil samples, which, you know, as Volley points out, is clearly a staged little joke that they were doing on him. But they were taking soil samples, and he drives his car up and he sees all this. And one of the more interesting things about that case is that he drives straight to a preacher. He drives straight to his church to go talk to his pastor, because he immediately has all this, you know, theological shock.
Yeah.
You can kind of see where it goes. Like, they, instead of aliens, fundamentalists immediately see demons. And it's true. The UFO modern wave really kicks off right after all that. Right after Parsons and Hubbard do their rituals. Then comes Kenneth Arnold. Like, right after. And so Marjorie Cameron, the woman that he was using as his Scarlet Lady, and I should say that both Hubbard and Parsons, they both thought that the Babylon ritual worked, because Marjorie Cameron shows up like at Parsons' house right after, kind of out of the blue, and Parsons said, oh, this is her. This is the Scarlet Lady, and I'm going to incarnate a moonchild. So he starts having, you know, incarnate relations with her, and Hubbard sits next to her and Parsons while they're doing it, and is the scribe, because that's how a lot of these rituals work. And the Amalantra working too. It's like during the act, the woman channels a being and then, you know, tells you what the being is saying. And so Hubbard is sitting there taking notes while they're doing it.
He's taking notes.
The founder of Scientology, folks.
I'm sure we're not the first ones to use air quotes for taking notes in that situation.
Right. Man, magic gets weird. So they thought it worked, though. They thought Marjorie Cameron was the Scarlet Lady and that Parsons was on his way to creating a moonchild. And so Marjorie Cameron, after Parsons blows himself up, ends up getting really interested in this because she thought it worked too. And there were a number of people involved who were like, yep, it all worked. Crowley, yep, it all worked. And this occult invasion. So they actually agree, right? They kind of agree with the Collins elite, who agree with us. And that's why I was going into the timeline of when I learned about all of this stuff, because we did our research independently. And I think our audience who likes us, understands and appreciates the value of that. Like we did, yes, Jacques Vallée and John Keel went and already did it, but we went and did it again. Like we did it from zero and without them. So, if we get to the same place, it ends up being more of a state of confirmation and closer to proof. So we actually agree with all of them.
Yeah.
But what we don't agree with is how they interpret it all. So you guys know how I love timelines. And I think you're going to love the timeline that I love right now because I have chronological notes on the story of final events. And I'll publish these on Fortean Winds along with the episode. So the shift into demonic theory really starts in 1952, and the members of Collins' elite, even one of Nick Redfern's informants named Richard Duke, which as we said is a pseudonym for someone, he was high up in the government, and he decided to move away from the theory that these things were Soviet weapons, because that was the other thing that they were all worried about. And people even still throw this around today, as we've discussed.
Yeah.
That, these are all just Russian weapons of some sort that they've been... Right. For what? And when? How? Anyway, that's silly. So the Collins elite realized that too, and they move away from it and towards a demonic interpretation of the phenomenon somewhere around 1952 to 53. And then Army intelligence conducts research into mental telepathy and ESP, which we've talked about many times, Project Stargate and many other things. Yep. But that research really gets into high gear in that time, post-World War II, because it's coming in reaction to Soviet programs that are doing the same thing. And they're like, well, if they're building psychic spies, we have to have psychic spies. So the Collins elite is seeing all that, and they're like, well, this is it. I mean, now they're doing remote viewing and ESP, and this is basically witchcraft. And so what's up? And a division begins between a scientific and more functional portion of the government who's like, whatever this is, we need to be the ones to find it and master it first in order to maintain a strategic advantage. And then you have the Collins elite saying, I think might be a deception, a demonic deception. Mm-hmm. And the Collins elite during that time begin to believe that whatever entity that was recovered in the Roswell crash, and that gets confirmed here too, and that's been talked about many times, that at least one live entity came out of the Roswell crash, and then they did eventually communicate with it, and they called it EBE. And they believed that EBE was giving them technology secrets or scientific secrets, but it was doing so with a demonic agenda, and that all of these things that it was giving them were turning out bad. And I don't think they got into too much specifics with Redfern as to what those things were, but they were basically saying that these things were like the jinn, like or bad jinn, where they were giving you something, but it would always end up being detrimental to your life. And in this case, society.
Right.
So that division becomes important because we know that division exists today. We have people like Lou Elizondo, Chris Mellon, who came out later, long after this book was published and dismissed by a lot of the UFO community. They came out later and said, yes, there are these fundamentalist types in the government that are preventing UFO disclosure or controlling it. And then there is another wing of people studying it. And there's sometimes 3 or 4 of these different programs competing with each other. So there's not a single answer to this question. The answer is that 4 or 5 different groups, just like when we talk about who runs the world, the answer is there are a bunch of competing nodes.
Yeah.
And that's happening within the government over UAP stuff. This Collins elite is one of those competing nodes, which I would say right now is absolutely in power.
Yeah, for sure.
So this really ties up what we've been talking about. And I just kind of been sensing this, I guess, a little bit, or thought I maybe sensed it underneath all of this, and it really brought it home for me and confirmed it all. These Collins elite are part of this dominionist, dispensationalist, selling the apocalypse push. They're part of all of it, and I will prove it to you by the end of the podcast. So around 1960, one of Redfern's informants, Richard Duke, he says his final task was investigating a psychic named Ruth Montgomery, who popularized a theory called walk-in, which meant souls being replaced by other entities. Sounds very similar to that Babylon working ritual. So at this point, the Collins elite is looking into the idea that these beings, which they believe are demons, so from their point of view, demons are inhabiting people. They're also invading us with the intention of building an extraterrestrial narrative up. And they're ultimately going to use that extraterrestrial narrative in a Project Bluebeam-like fashion, where they're going to project all of these different gods all over different parts of the globe who worship those types of gods. So over the West, it would be mostly Christian, and Jesus would appear. And over India, it would be like Krishna or Shiva. Over the Middle East, it would be like Muhammad. And they would say, look, we are all of these things. We gave you all of these things. And now we're ready for you to understand that we are your progenitors. And to the Collins elite, that was the devil's final play. They thought we would all believe that, and then that would turn us away from Christianity, which completely ignores the fact that over half the world isn't Christian.
Right.
Already. So
So they already have this doomsday outlook set in their minds.
Yes, I will go into the theology of why they are wrong. But it's hard to talk to a fundamentalist about why they're wrong, because they pull out specific things and they say, I'm only going to listen to this one thing or this one verse in the Bible.
Right.
And I'm not going to listen to all the other verses and theologians that contradict it, even Jesus.
Right, of course.
So then in the 60s and 70s, the Collins elite see this getting into black magic territory. And there's a huge occult revival at this time too. So they see all this happening and they're like, this is it. This is the devil at work. Yeah. And the Betty and Barney Hill abduction occurs, and the Collins elite analyze the case, and they believe that these are mental attack visions. They think that these were done by spiritual kidnappers rather than, ETs. That's a pretty advanced view, even if they got there through folklore. But I think that they were looking at both. They were looking at science and evidence. They were just interpreting it through a folkloric lens.
Right.
And then in 72... a Operation MK Often begins, and there were a number of programs under Operation MK Ultra, which is ultimately what the government, and these are established, this is part of history, you can Wikipedia this, they were engaged in mind control programs back in the 60s and 70s, and then there were a bunch of programs under that MK Ultra parent program, and one of them was MK Often, which many of the records were destroyed around these things. So all we have are witness and rumor and innuendo. And in the case of MK Often, that involves the occult. According to some researchers and authors, that's what happened. The government got involved in the occult. Sometimes left-hand path, sometimes right-hand path. They were getting into channeling. And according to them, they contacted a famous British witch named Sybil Leek. And she did a seance with them, essentially, and she channeled an entity during the seance which told them that it was deceiving them, that it was laughing at them and mocking them, and that they were never going to beat it, and it was going to destroy Christianity, and they were right, but they were never going to be able to stop it. And some of the Collins elite wisely got a little suspicious after that and thought maybe Sybil Leek understood what they wanted to hear and was just telling them that, channeling that. Mind you, they had no scientific instruments they weren't measuring EMF or anything that would give them some indication that something supernatural was actually happening. It was all, trust me, bro, with Sybil Leek.
Right. Interesting.
But they took it to heart.
She must have had a very convincing British accent.
They are a charming people. So right around 1973, they start asking people if they've had out-of-body experiences or if they've been abducted by UFOs. The government starts to get really into that, and the Collins elite gets really into that, and the public starts to report a bunch of cases of it. And this goes all the way into the 90s. The abductee phenomenon was contactee was really big in the 90s, and they thought that this New Age movement was a outcrop of this attempt to take over Christianity, which was being done by UFO entities. So you can see how it gets all blended. And, I think it's smart that we kind of exclude the culture right now, but we've discussed the satanic panic and things like that before. So that's all happening at the same time. And that's not a coincidence. Like, these are all the same folks. They go to the same church. They're sharing the same beliefs. And, there's everything that's going on with the church at the time. And it ends up getting involved into the government's response on UFOs, which what we've said for a long time now, and we've had whistleblowers say repeatedly. But their conclusion from all of these contactee and abductee events were that the NHEs, or non-human entities, or demons, were feeding on human energy and emotions, fear, pain, sexual energy, and their ultimate goal was to harvest the human soul. They just kept feeding like a parasite until they could eventually take over.
Okay.
I have heard this before from someone in the public, and we were like, where'd you hear that? And why do you have a problem with us? And that someone is Mr. Tom DeLonge from Blink-182. Why am I talking like that? Where did you hear that, Tom?
Right.
Where did you hear about humans getting their souls eaten and that this was all a big thing? So guess who I think Tom DeLonge is in bed with?
Well, couldn't be the Collins elite, could it?
No, yeah, I guess it could.
So he's a active member?
Or he's clearly in touch with them. They're clearly in touch with him. Jim Semivan is bro. Like, he's clearly in touch with these people. And these are political games, right? So if you want to get UFO stuff, if you want to get in with the UFO crowd, that's who they are. This is one huge node of power in the government who has access to the data and the information.
Yeah.
And they are the Collins elite, and this is what they believe. So you want to play games, you gotta wear the robe.
Yeah. It really is an interesting perspective because, we talk about how NHI are, folklore generators or, play a part in human history. And they believe in that, and they have their own spin on it, but they believe in it, and they've institutionalized it, and hold great power.
Exactly. And then what did they do with that power, and how do you enact your solutions, and what solutions are there? We're almost there.
Let's keep going.
So in the 90s, these guys contact Ray Boesch, who I mentioned is a famous Fortean as well, and a good one. And he's also a priest. There's some of us who are pastors and priests.
Sure.
And they provide him with evidence, including autopsy photos of victims killed by psychic methods. This has been rumored to happen a long time. Here were 2 DoD witnesses that presented evidence of that. And that, my friends, is a report. That is how a report works. You gather a bunch of those reports and you can form a pattern, maybe find something scientific off of that, but don't blame someone because that's all they have. You want that. You should thank them.
Right.
And the Collins elite develop a report, apparently, that goes around the government that basically says UFOs are a Trojan horse intended to lead humanity into a one-world government.
Oh, geez. We're going there?
That is owned by the Antichrist.
There we are. Yep. Okay.
So that sort of brings us into today, or at least to the time when Nick writes his book. And Nick's kind of been off the grid for a couple of years, and I want to respect that. I didn't reach out to him before this episode. Nick, if you would like us to say anything further or talk about it, please let us know.
Yeah.
But the book gets published in 2010. I read the book New Year's Eve weekend. We had already established that our operational timeline for the theocratic takeover had begun in 2010. So you can imagine my surprise when I'm reading on New Year's Eve day on the new Kindle that I just got for Christmas, this book, which is talking about everything that we've talked about in our research and verifying that there is a group in the government that has this theocratic bent. And then it's talking about the solutions that they see. How do we handle this? Because you and I have kind of pitched a few different solutions, because in our view, if you take this past demons, you can start to actually look at what this might be scientifically. If we have to redefine what we see as physics in order to defend ourselves, let us do so. So
Right.
that's what we've talked about. And in our Alien Abductions, the Switch article, I think I've mentioned, we even have the concept plans for a demon blaster. I think it's just a matter of finding the right frequency. It'll probably work.
Just don't cross the streams.
But that's where we went with solutions, because we can look beyond the folklore. Now, if you absolutely believe the folklore, and let me just say, I don't want to be enemies with these people. I think we agree on more things than we don't. Like, it's like I said about Tom DeLonge. Like, just stop at the fundamentalist part. Like, let's focus on what we agree on. I agree that these things are what people have been calling demons in some cases.
Right, right.
So we agree there. Let's figure out what they are.
Yeah.
But their solution was, hey, how about we take over the U.S. and turn everyone Christian?
Right. Weird take.
I'm not just riffing off of what we just did.
Yeah.
This is what I read afterward. So this is what Robert Manners, who was one of Nick's witnesses, said to him in 2010. I'm going to read you the following from the book. This is Final Events by Nick Redfern. In February 2010, I asked Robert Manners why the U.S. military was apparently being indoctrinated into an army of literal Christian soldiers with a solid acceptance of end-time scenarios. After all, I said to him, in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and who knows where next, wouldn't the military just go ahead and follow orders anyway, even if they weren't of a fundamentalist and end times dominated mindset? Manners looked grim. They would, he said. That's what they're trained to do, follow orders. But you're missing the point. The whole point of creating an army of God has less to do with the Middle East and more to do with preparing the troops for the day they come home, when religious fascism, the New World Order, the hologram things we told you about, comes right here to the U.S.
Right.
He was saying religious fascism in 2010. That was the plan. And the plan was being executed by the Collins elite in order to prevent the demonic invasion of UFOs. These were high-level billionaires. These were military-industrial complex gurus. These were scientists. These were generals. These were people who held power and money. And that's what they wanted. So this is one of our nodes, right? I mean, we found the NAR node, and it's aligned with this node in the government that absolutely connects to UFOs.
Yeah. It's pretty wild.
Thanks to all of you who stuck with us through this crazy season of twists and turns going, how are they going to wrap this all up? There were definitely times when I did not know. But Nick Redfern helped us out here, and I think he helps us wrap up a bunch of these threads and gives us more context even into our modern times. But Manners goes on to say, if and okay, it is still an if our country becomes enslaved under a government that's going to use religious fear to control the population and lock us down from the rest of the world, the people running the show will need someone to run that control no matter what. And that's what they're doing right now. They're slowly grooming and creating an army of God's soldiers that are going to police the U.S. and, as they see it, keep the invaders, the demons, at bay. Isn't that amazing?
It is amazing.
That's exactly what we just described in our episode right before.
Yeah.
I read the book, and then I'm like, this book was written in 2010. We just grabbed our episode last week. Like, wow, it came true. And, so it was confirmation that our research into the operational part of this was right. It's also more context into the why of it all. And it absolutely ties into UFOs because, hey, those suckers are real. Yeah.
It's interesting, too, because you mentioned it wasn't all about the Middle East. But I remember hearing, during the Iraq War, a leaked story about how there were generals in the Iraq War who believed that there was a biblical message in the U.S. Army fighting in Babylon. Basically.
Yeah, there were a number of these people. I mean, I met some of them. Like but it doesn't really matter if the orders are to go to Iraq. And some people are doing so for biblical means, and others are doing for constitutional means. In the end, and that was the great thing about the military. It didn't really matter. We're all on the same team.
Right.
But Manners, again, continues. He says, can you imagine the entire country, maybe 10 years from now, and after the next 9/11, a dirty bomb in a big city, maybe policed and controlled by the U.S. military, an army totally convinced and believing that what they're doing is according to what God wants and that will save the U.S. from a satanic threat? That's the crux of what's going on. Indoctrinate the troops today for when they're needed here tomorrow. I call it biblical Big Brother. Just watch. 10 years from now, the U.S. military will be indistinguishable from religious warriors. He wrote this in 2010.
Oh, man. Yeah.
This guy is saying it. His witness is coming out and saying, I'm not cool with this. I'm a part of this Collins elite, and I'm not okay with this. This is not the right response. And he is absolutely right. Brave man. Thank you.
Yeah.
And that's the plan. Save the country by keeping it under a religious iron fist and enforcing Christianity on everyone. But if that's to be the future of Christianity, I'm not sure it's worth it. It's not the Christianity I want taught. Because it's not Christianity, bro.
Right.
It's not. You're looking for the devil. You're looking for who hijacked the church. Maybe you should look in the mirror.
Yeah. When you talk about, I always think about the theory. I guess I don't know where this theory comes from, but I hear it all the time about the dark side of the moon and how there's soul. There's alien structures there that are capturing souls. Yes. And then there's the reptile theory that says the reptiles are the ones capturing souls. Right. And then they go, well, the reptiles are actually demons. And then, so it all comes back here. And it all tracks from here. It all tracks back to here. That's kind of our job, is to go find the source. And it's a continued theme of media control with theological intent that does that. They've infected, if you will, ufology. There's YouTube pastors, there's viral prophets and podcast apostles who are forming a parallel church. And it's parallel to the teachings of Jesus Christ. So, I think you got to look at this less simply. UFOs, demons. Oh, I should do all of the things that the Bible tells me not to do to fight the demons. You're murdering people in the middle of the street. Yeah. This is not biblical. This is not Christ-like. So, it isn't fringe anymore. There's sermons before Senate hearings. Right. So we have two sides today. We have a side of this that says, look, we're waking up to a new reality. You have Bledsoe and many others saying 2026, 2027. These are going to be pivotal years where we're going to wake up to some sort of new reality. And then the fundamentalist reaction to that is, if we do, that would be demonic. That would be the devil's final deception. Right. And all of these people are fighting over control over UFO disclosure, both the materials and the knowledge and information and the technology. So these are the things that are at bay here that are keeping it held back. And then you got to wonder, how does the phenomenon play into that? Because it's aware of all of that. They're not dumb. Right.
And I think that's a good question for us to continue to research and try to answer, because I'm sure that whatever chess moves they think that they're making, they're definitely two boards below what the phenomenon's doing. This book, Final Events, as I mentioned, was kind of dismissed by the UFO community. And now I hope it will be looked at again with some fresh eyes, because you're seeing all of this stuff happen. And we independently confirmed that there's good reason to compare this UFO phenomenon to demonology.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean that they are demons. It just means that there's good reason to believe that. So both that and then Redfern's work that captured people talking about what was going to be happening now, and us looking around and seeing that it's happening now, all provides greater confirmation that this is what we're really dealing with. And it's an answer to a lot of different things that we've been asking about here, and ties our work together. The truth hides where no one wants to look. It's inside of a religious bureaucracy. And it involves some spiritual paranoia that is just really super touchy. And it bothers me that we talk about this, and I know it turns some people off because maybe they do have fundamentalist views. But I do know that there are some fundamentalist folks that listen to this show, and I really try to be sensitive about what I'm saying because I want to be respectful of your views.
Sure.
And I don't think that this follows a fundamentalist idea of Christianity either.
Right.
Thou shalt not kill. Pretty standard.
Right. When we think about the interpretation of UAPs throughout history, you know, and there's a lot of positive to it too. Like we talk about how they could be interpreted as angels, or people had hopeful interpretations of what they're seeing. But it's almost like I always think of George Carlin, because were the people that were on their own individually seeing the phenomenon and spinning it as a positive thing because it's a real personal experience for them. But I always think of George Carlin and how he always says, never underestimate the power of stupid people in large groups. You got this phenomenon, you got a group of people now who are obviously bound by dogma, religious dogma, interpreting the same phenomenon, and it becomes a negative thing. You know, it becomes a demonic thing.
Yeah, it ends up being this very simplistic binary view of the world, which they say, these Collins elite types say is the truth, and that any attempt to get us away from that binary division is demonic. Right. I mean, it's like the new iPhone versus old iPhone sort of mentality. But that's such a simplistic way of looking at the universe, right? If I have something good that happens to me, it's an angel. If I have something bad that happens to me that's supernatural, it's a demon. So in many cases, these psychics, these channelers, these mediums have said they think that they're dealing with the same being that interacts with them differently at different times.
Yeah.
And then other times they appear to be different beings, and we can find traces of this all the way back into the 1600s with Robert Kirk's work, when we talked about like the boggart versus the brownie. They thought the brownie was a helpful spirit that would help around the house, and the boggart was something that was negative and it would disrupt your house. And you could turn a brownie into a boggart if you were mean to it. They didn't say you could turn an angel into a demon.
Right.
It's the same behaviors, the same supernatural, if you will, behaviors, that they're anomalous behaviors, I prefer to call it, that they're talking about, that they're talking about stuff getting knocked over in their house, or they're talking about waking up and finding hot water there. Maybe it was just the fairy feeling different that day. It got a good night's sleep or something.
Right.
but they reduce it into these angel and demon binary categories.
Yeah.
And that's fine if you want to take that as your spiritual or theocratic view, but an objective analyst or scientist or researcher knows how to put their faith and beliefs into one bucket and their objectivity into another. And none of us are perfect at it. But the closer you can get to the, perfect objectivity, the more you can get to the truth. And that's what we strive for here. We're certainly not perfect at it, but we're always mindful of it.
So this seems like such a dense topic that we should probably revisit this again, if not multiple times. This is happening now, and it's important. And also, I need to read this book because it sounds really good.
Yeah, everyone should read the book. Go ahead and purchase it. Nick is a good guy. You shouldn't feel bad about giving him your money. And he suffered for this work a little bit. So, I think it's just recompense. Yeah,
I didn't realize he was connected with Tawny's either, which he wrote one of my favorite books on the phenomenon.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that you know Tawny's, but not Redfern. I think a lot of people in the ufology world are the reverse. But, we're just such big fans of Mac that, we bring him up a lot. But Nick is super prolific. He's written many, many books. I think over 60.
Oh, okay.
Books on Forteana. And he's done it like him and Lauren Coleman. I always competed for my number 6 or number 7 in Forteana, but Nick just moved up a couple of notches after reading this. Shout out to him. And shout out to our sponsor, Lasani, who has vegan skincare for anti-aging and acne. And they're giving our listeners a discount with code Fortean25, which I will put a link to in the description. We use Blasani. We like Blasani. It's all vegan and all natural. I feel better about putting that on my skin because I know what goes on my skin eventually hits my liver. And I would check them out because they're safe, effective, and vegan.
Yeah, for sure. I use that the Very Tony face cream. It works great. And knowing it doesn't damage my liver is a pretty good plus. But didn't you had a victory lap related to Cheney? You wanted to take the lap.
All right, yeah, I got to gloat on this one a little bit because Dave Grush did an interview, the first one in over a year, I think, on Megyn Kelly, and folks should check that out. And she was prompting him as to who was in charge of the UFO phenomenon, and the one big name that he dropped, he even called him Darth Vader himself. He said Dick Cheney.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, we told you that 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And I had no insider access. I had no special, confidential, classified authority in order to get all that. They had trillions of dollars. They had an army of bureaucrats, an actual army, and every type of cyber warfare and security at their disposal. And I had a laptop and Cheeto dust on my socks because I couldn't find a napkin.
Oh man, you still doing that? But he isn't mentioned often though, is he? I mean, he should be, but he's not.
Yeah, why not? And why did we name him 2 years before that? I even said his name on THC. And I got all nervous. And Greg's like, why are you getting nervous about naming names? Because when we name a name, it's not speculative. When we name a name, it's a very sacred moment in open source analysis.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm sure it's Dick. Did you ever think you would love Dick this much, Bones?
I don't know how to answer that. Oh, Dick Cheney. Yeah, I have my opinions. Well, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks, Ram, for a great discussion. We are going to get into this a little bit further in later episodes, but hey, Happy New Year. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and have a good one. Till next time.
Take care, y'all. Thanks for listening.